We bringing you our live broadcast today from Beulah Heights First Pentecostal Church in New Haven, Connecticut. This is from the Beulah Heights Women's Ministry. Tonight, we are going to have our final broadcast on the breast cancer awareness. We want to thank the Lord because we have some special guests tonight. Given first of all, one will be giving us a survivor story. The next one will be giving us critical information that we need. So first, we want to thank the Lord. We are under the leadership of our pastor, which is none other than the Honorable Bishop Theodore L. Brooks, which is also the presiding bishop of the Pentecostal Assembly of the World. We want to thank him even for allowing us to be able to put on this platform. First of all, I want to introduce our first speaker of this evening. Good evening. And her
Hello.
name is Miss Lolita Hallelujah Brooks. She is originally from our area, Stratford, Connecticut, but has since moved to Southbridge, Virginia. And she tells me that is Northern Virginia.
Yes, ma'am.
Chronicle?
Right next to Quantico.
Right next to Chronicle.
Right.
All right. Now, what she's going to do, she's going to tell us about her survivor story with breast cancer. All right, sister.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. I just want to tell you a little bit about the best $50 that I've ever spent in my life. And my story starts um, in the fall of 2016. My husband's company was being purchased by a larger company. And one of the stipulations, because of his company being purchased, was that we had to have all of our physicals up to date no later than December 6th of 2016. His company sent someone to his job and they conducted his physical right there on the spot. And because I worked full time, I needed to have all of my well woman visits all in order. I did not have time to go and get my mammogram. I did not have time to go for my regular checkup. I did not have time because I'm an educator and we were opening a brand new school. And I didn't have time on the calendar. And my husband was giving me a hard time to get this done by December 6th. Otherwise, they were going to be charging him an additional $50 per pay period for my insurance. And I was a little annoyed with him because I figured of all the things, $50. You can't pay $50 for me until I have time to actually go to the doctor. And he just kept saying, please go get this done. So I said, fine, that's fine. I took a day off from work and I lined up all of my appointments on that day. Okay. When I lined up all of my appointments, I knew I had to get a mammogram. So I went ahead and scheduled everything. I went to see my general practitioner first thing in the morning. I saw another doctor. I had my cholesterol checked. I went and got breakfast. I had a wonderful morning at IHOP. And then I went for my mammogram. When I went for my mammogram, the receptionist came in and she said, "Well, Miss Brooks," she called me to the desk and she said, um, "Your doctor accidentally checked 3D mammogram." And I asked her if there was a problem. And she said, "Well, yes, because you traditionally or normally you get a regular mammogram, a traditional mammogram." And I asked her, what did I have to do at that point? And she said that I had to call the doctor to get another order for the traditional mammogram. Well, I had already had a temper tantrum about taking a day off from work and going to get this mammogram. So I said, you know what? I'll just pay out of pocket. How much is it out of pocket? And she said, well, your insurance doesn't cover it. It's $50. And I remember laughing in that moment, laughing to myself. And I remember saying, you know what? This $50 is going to get me one way or another. If it wasn't my husband hounding me for this $50, it was the mistake from my doctor. So I went ahead and I paid the $50. And I like to say that that $50 saved my life. And the reason why I say that $50 saved my life is because 3 days later, I got a phone call to come back for more pictures. When I got the phone call, I originally just thought, you know what? I've not my first call back. It's something small. It has to be something small. And something told me to just be still, just listen, because I had gotten a 3D mammogram, and that was supposed to be better than the traditional mammogram. So I listened and I asked, what would you like me to do? And she said, we want you to come in for more pictures because, Miss Brooks, we only saw a shadow and we just want to be sure. So I went back in and they took traditional pictures and they compared them with my 3D pictures. What they saw on the 3D mammogram did not show up on the traditional mammogram. What they saw on the 3D mammogram was a shadow, and they wanted me to have a sonogram. From that sonogram, they were able to determine that I had a solid mass, no bigger than the size of my fingernail. Had I not paid that $50 for that 3D mammogram, or had my husband not, gotten on my case about getting my mammogram when I was supposed to get my mammogram, I wouldn't have found the tumor. I would not have found the tumor. The doctors would not have found the tumor. When I went for the mammogram, they would not have seen the tumor. Okay. It was an accident. I was not looking for it. I did not feel it. My doctor didn't feel it. No one felt it. We weren't looking for it. Had I not had that 3D mammogram, the position of my tumor would have gone unnoticed for at least another year. So, because of that, and because of it being so small, I was able to have a biopsy and they were able to determine that it was cancer. I was able to undergo a lumpectomy in January of 2017. I underwent the lumpectomy and they were able to determine through pathology that I was triple positive. Okay. And by me being triple positive, I was estrogen positive, progesterone positive, and HER2 positive. So basically, everything that made me a woman was feeding this cancer. Okay. During this time, I had a wonderful supports circle of friends that I made here in Virginia. Like I said, I'm originally from Connecticut. So my family's in Connecticut. My parents are in Connecticut. My support circle is in Connecticut. However, I had a group of friends here that helped me. They held me up. They did what they could. But when I looked around for women, a support group of women that actually had breast cancer, um, especially, particularly women of African American descent, I couldn't find that in Northern Virginia. So I originally reached out to my cousin. Her name is Lynn Sistrunk, and she was affiliated with A Sister's Journey in Connecticut. Now, A Sister's Journey became my family. Sister's Journey became my support circle. It became my prayer circle. They became my education. They became just my family. They became my family. And they reached out to me across the miles to make sure that I was okay. I had to start AC treatments. I did 3 months of AC treatments. I did 3 months of Taxol. I did 33 rounds of radiation. I did 1 full year of Herceptin. During that time, I also did Lupron injections. And they were able to determine, because I was triple positive, that they recommended my ovaries and my tubes be removed because my ovaries became receptors. I went in for a consultation in 2017 to find out about removing my tubes and ovaries. And while I was there, they were able to determine that I had quite a few fibrous tumors in my uterus. So we put off surgery until June of 2018, and I underwent a complete and total hysterectomy to remove everything, just because we didn't want any chances of anything coming back. Now, during this time, my oncologist Sister's Journey, everyone that I needed, my family, my friends, my husband, my mother-in-law, my parents, everyone held me up. Everyone held me up, but especially Sister's Journey, because it did not matter through the miles. It did not matter. And one of the things that I want to say is that when I look back at my story and I look back at how things were lined up, how all of the events were lined up, I look at the steps and how they were ordered. And Jacqueline Randolph, one of the ladies of Sister's Journey, a 20-year survivor, told me, you know, if you love the Lord, there are no accidents. And I have to take a step back and I have to look at the accident, that accidental check mark of my doctor, my husband. Okay, my husband. And he always says that I paint him in a negative light whenever I say something about him hounding me over $50. But that $50, I am so thankful to my husband for hounding me over $50, because without that constant, Lo, you need to get that done, I wouldn't have gone. Without the doctor accidentally marking the wrong box, I wouldn't have gotten the 3D done. And without all of those steps, I would have not been able to find the tumor when I did. It was very early and it was able to be treated extremely early. And that's why I say that $50, that saved my life.
Yes, yes. Thank the Lord. $50
$50.
save your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you just can't take it for granted. You know, the word tells us the steps of a righteous man
That's right.
are ordered by law. We don't always know, but God knows. You know, there's nothing impossible with God. We might think things are impossible or accident, I think you said. But there is no accidents in Christ.
No, there is not.
You know, He knows how to put things together. There's an order.
Mm-hmm.
And God orders our steps, and He knows what He's doing. So that would say the best $50.
The best $50 I've ever spent in my life. My husband, I have to thank my husband. We've been married for a long time. I have to thank my husband. I have to thank my doctors, and I have to thank the Lord, because he ordered my steps so that I can see what was happening. And it wasn't until I stepped back and took a look at how everything laid out. And I am so thankful and so blessed that everything I took the time to listen. He was speaking to me and I took the time to listen.
And that's the thing. We have to take the time to listen. If nothing else, as women and men too, we know our own bodies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we have to listen to our own bodies and the information. I thank you so very, very much for taking the time to share the story with us. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you for taking this time out. Also, we have another guest that we are going to bring on tonight that, we need a lot of information. And I realize a lot of times what happens is it seems like we are afraid of information. The word of God tells us that my people perish for the lack of information. And a lot of times we don't get information, but then on the other hand, we get information, and seeing that we are so fearful, we will not receive the information that is applied for us. But we have someone tonight on our program that is full of information for us. But I have somebody special, real special, that I have on here that have come in to introduce.
Hey, my brother.
I got somebody special tonight. None other than our pastor, our bishop, Theodore L. Brooks. Go introduce our speaker tonight.
Hello, my brother. How you doing, man?
Hey, brother. Good to see you.
Listen, glad to have you
in town.
Yeah. I'm going to just introduce the gentleman and get out of the way. First of all, it was over 25 years ago that we connected up. And when we connected up 25 years ago, we have a bond and a fellowship together that is unbreakable. We don't see each other all the time, but ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, this is my brother from another mother. He is a great friend. He was instrumental in helping me in my journey as I journeyed down the hospital trustee board for 23 years. He was one of the instruments that got me where I was. He has been a continuum, a constant person in terms of looking out for health care for people of color, Black and brown people. He's been super concerned about that. Not only is he just heading the NAACP Health Commission, but he did a book. It's a manual he did on the health disparities and showed how that people of color don't receive the same kind of care that people do that live in the richer parts of our community. Connecticut being one of the most wealthiest states in the union, but yet people of color are often left out and not included into getting good health care. Besides that, we worked on AIDS Interfaith together. He got me hooked up in the AIDS Interfaith program, and corralled me. He told me, I'm going to do it. You got to do it. You're the bishop. You got to do it. And then he got me on the sickle cell. You got to do it. You're the bishop. You got to do it. And I'm working with them now. We're going to do a blood drive at church coming up in the future for sickle cell, because that's something that we don't always want to talk about. And Mr. Rawlins, Jim, is a wonderful, great, crazy guy like me, but straight up, honest, will tell you the truth. He came in and did a workshop for the men at church in terms of, brothers, go get your prostate check, take care of yourself. So I'm going to get out of the way, but I appreciate you so much. You still owe me a cup of coffee, man. I'm upping it now to breakfast or lunch whenever we can get out of here. This is Jim Rawlins, former vice president at Yale Haven Health System, a man with a passion and a heart to help out his brothers and sisters. Don't have to know you. All he wants to know, be healthy, take good care of yourself. You're going to enjoy this. Listen to him. He's got something to offer to you. Jim Rawlins. Jim, thank you, man.
Thank you, Bish. Boy, I miss you. Boy, Miss Phillips, you got me that time. Good afternoon, everyone who's on this podcast and those who may hear of the podcast in our community. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about cancer and particularly about breast cancer. About a year ago, I was reading the New York Times magazine, and they did a full 3-page spread on cancer and the advances over the last, let's say, 15 years from the American Cancer Society. Now, you can imagine a 3-page spread in the New York Times is a very costly endeavor. But what surprised me was the fact that there were 3 pages of the advances within the non-African American community, and yet a single paragraph at the bottom of the 3 pages that spoke to the fact that disparities still exist between whites and blacks in cancer in the United States. They had a 3-page spread and devoted a single paragraph to the disparities and inequities and excessive mortality and morbidity around the African Americans in the United States. And I was appalled. They could have taken the time in that 3-page spread to talk to some of the things that could be recommendations relative to the continued disparity, but they did not. And I was and remain appalled that the mainstream society will continue to not speak to the disparities and equities in America, much as we are walking in the streets now with Black Lives Matter, bringing up the subjects that they are too embarrassed and ashamed to speak about, yet they continue to their passivity to promulgate in our communities. Now, I'm trained as an epidemiologist, which means I study diseases. And I took the time since then to look up every article I could on cancer generically, and particularly breast cancer. I lost a sister about a year ago with breast cancer. And unfortunately, she lived miles away from here, and she never talked about it. But the way that she presented, I knew that she had presented late in the development of cancer. And it has always bothered me that information that we don't have is often part of our demise. And so what I have been doing is getting a lot of information and come to the conclusion, and the conclusion in many of the studies, that the current disparities and inequities within the healthcare theater, and I won't say system because it's not a system, the disparities themselves are what we call social determinants. By that I mean they're in the hands of individuals, they're in the hands of our community to a great extent if we understand what I call the data and the science around cancers, and in particular today around breast cancer. What the report did say overall is that over the last 20 years, there's been a 2% decrease in cancers generally. But most of the decline in larger areas has been around lung cancer because of all the money that has been put into educating the community around lung cancer and preventing lung cancer by breaking the back of the tobacco industry. However, the cancer disparities in America in 2020, the richest country on the planet, still remains at 30% higher for brothers and sisters in this land of honey. 30% higher. And just as a note, the rate for Native Americans is 50% higher, excessive deaths and mortality. Beyond that, the issue of getting into healthcare, just as our previous speaker spoke about, and she was lucky and with the will of God. But by and large, if you access healthcare and get diagnosed late in the diagnosis, your likely survival, and in the cancer world, when they're doing treatment, they give you likelihoods of surviving 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, et cetera, and in some cases, totally reversible. But generically, we know that the later you get diagnosis, the less the likelihood that you have a positive long-term likelihood. And it's actually 5 years less than all others because we access healthcare so late for a myriad of issues that we'll get into. And that's why when I talk about this and think about this, I'm somewhat optimistic, because a great deal of the inequities and disparities in cancer generically, and particularly breast cancer, are things that we have the ability to have some control over if we come together. And I remember some discussions I had many years ago with Miss White. I was involved with Sisters Journey 20, 30 years ago, and we used to sit in my office at the hospital and strategize on how we can bring resources to Sisters Journey. And I remember them days, in the early days of Sisters Journey's development. But going into breast cancer, particularly breast cancer with African American women, one of the biggest challenges we have as a community. And yesterday we were talking to Evangelist Phillips. She came across something. She said something that was consistent with what we'll be talking about today, on how we have trepidations and fear and all any other reasons we can come up with for not being diagnosed early. The earlier you're diagnosed, the more likely you are to survive. And equally important, it's been found, I saw a recent study within the last probably 2 months. They actually did a study around breast cancer that compared those who keep their appointments for the annual mammograms and those who don't. And the actual mortality from breast cancer was higher from those who come across the lumps as opposed to those that get an early diagnosis because of the early mammogram screening. So it speaks to many of the issues we have in our communities around breast cancer. And we all know that the breast cancer issue is really challenging within our community for a lot of different issues, a lot of variables. But the variables are, by and large, within our control if we understand what they are and can work to make sure that we drive down those barriers to access. And there are 5 or 6 things that we don't deal with and understand to the point where we can marshal our collective resources, because there are other countries and communities with similar demographics, but have much better health outcomes relative to breast cancer. So if you took 2 communities that have the same demographics, say Connecticut is 13% African American, and you take another state which has a 13% African American population, yet you see the death rate different, the question is why? Because cancer really, by and large, other than certain anomalies, is colorblind. What happens is that access becomes a problem. Your insurance status becomes a problem if you have a poor insurer. If you're underinsured, you may not have access to the right gynecologist or a screening program. If you're living in a city that is somewhat toxic, with toxic waste dumps. Now we know here in New Haven, we can go down the boulevard and there's a toxic waste dump. We can go over near Southern, there's a toxic waste dump. You will not see toxic waste dumps in the middle of in Guilford and other communities. So there are lots of variables. That's why I say that some of the variables, and I use the term determinants, if we understand that they have direct correlation to us losing our mothers and sisters and daughters. Now, this information was not in the New York Times publication. They alluded to the fact that the inequalities around wealth drove some of the disparities, but they didn't take the time to talk about the fact that if you are without insurance, therefore you may not in a timely fashion access healthcare in a timely fashion. You may go to a provider who is not really where he or she should be relative to the diagnosis. He or she may not understand, as our previous presenter talked about, the advances with 3D mammograms and the advantages of ultrasound technology. Somehow we have simply abdicated that, and we say that when we go to the doctor, when we go, and all too often we don't go in a timely fashion. Therefore, we have the kind of drama that we have. And breast cancer is uniquely different, and everyone knows this or should know this, is that African American women have a 7% less of an incidence of breast cancer than white women. African American women have a 7% less incidence of breast cancer than white women. Yet, we have a 30% higher mortality rate. Those two are inconsistent. They're inconsistent if, in fact, we access healthcare in a timely fashion. Because the later we get into healthcare, in the stages of cancer, more likely we won't survive. By and large, wealth and affluence and influence have direct correlation to how non-minorities access healthcare because it's their system. There's not the cultural challenges, there's not the linguistic challenges, the literacy issues are abandoned. So they, by and large, are able to get into the healthcare system in a timely fashion because they have good insurance. They have a system where they know what system's best for them relative to timely breast exams and mammograms and other types of diagnostic tools that are available to them. But if you don't have insurance, your likelihood of having an exam for at a timely fashion for a breast exam is minimized. And if it's minimized, by the time you get into care, it becomes much more challenging for the healthcare system to help you survive. And so as a community, we have to figure this out quickly. I'm trying to put together a broad comprehensive committee to look at what role, or saying it differently, if everyone had the same insurance, how much of the morbidity and mortality in Connecticut could be reduced? All things being the same, again, a variable that we can control, insurance status. If we all had the same insurance, and that would be commercial insurance or insurance that was fairly well accepted by most providers, would we have the excessive morbidity and mortality that we have from breast cancer? That means it's within our control. And so there are those kinds of things that are going on that we don't really think about. We may not understand the fact that we have an insurance card that, as my background, some insurance cards don't give you access to timely most of anything. There are kind of back-end programs that they'll pay for the hospitalizations, but they won't pay for the screening. And if we understand that, and we understand those nuances, we can in fact figure out over time how we can really protect our own community. And that's why I'm so appalled again at that article, because this information was not at the top of the page in that New York Times article. But if one took the time to dig into the article and look at the bibliographies, all the information is there. All the information is there. And so, again, going back to the previous presenter, she accidentally fell into something because of something happened in her life. But for individuals who are reluctant, beyond the issue of not having good insurance or insurance that accept it, the fear of the system and the denial that resides in our community plays a strong role in the kind of excessive morbidity and mortality when we lose and we have women and daughters, et cetera, and others have go through comorbidity and more importantly, the mortality rate all around us. Now, we all know young ladies and women going at a certain age So where are we at relative to, we know that, and everyone knows someone directly or indirectly who we haven't said to them at when they're 25 or 30 or 35, had you had a mammogram? That makes us complicit. Because we do know that if you get a mammogram in a timely fashion, the likelihood of having an outcome comparable to white America will be the same, except for there were some exceptions that we can go into. And that's kind of the challenge that we have around healthcare in America, but particularly when we lose our most sacred individuals, those who bring us new children and take care of our households, and that we all were born from, except from something in Shakespeare. I remember when I was in school, but there are these factors that are within our control. And I have so much data, but at the top level, there is actually barriers to healthcare, and we have to figure out how within our churches or any other organization that they're involved in, where we get the best treatment? Bring in the specialists. So we know that if we go here, the likelihood of having good outcomes and using the system in a timely fashion, the fact that we continue not to access healthcare in a timely fashion and then lose our mothers and sisters and brothers and children, and we continue to perpetuate that. The idea that the death rate for breast cancer has improved because of treatment, but the gap remains the same because we come in late, or we don't come in late for a myriad of issues. One could be no insurance. Another could be the lack of insurance. The other could be our environment in our homes where we have individuals who still smoke. The other could be the fact that we have toxic waste dumps around urban centers, whether or not it's Connecticut or New Haven, that we simply assume that they have no impact on the quality of our lives. And so, and they all have a direct impact. And that's why I'm somewhat positive and optimistic that if we start to look at what we call the social determinants, I'm going to take as much data as I can from the National Institute of Health, from local hospitals, and working with UConn Health Center, New Haven Hospital, the Smilow Cancer Center, and others, and say, let's look at when African-American women come into the system. Why is it they're coming in late? Is it because they have poor insurance? Is it because they're in denial? Is that because they're afraid of the system? Is it because they chose a provider who was the wrong provider relative to getting the best care? All those things are within our control. And I like to think there was in terms of the previous presenter, I've always had this. My motto was that we plan all the time, but I'm so glad we're having the opportunity to have this discussion, because we plan and God laughs, and so He's brought us together today, and he had me open up that New York Times at a certain point in time, and I've been doing a lot of work in other areas. I've always wanted to get back to cancer because the demonstrative impact in our communities and the numbers for prostate cancer are even off the board, because we're still pretty much macho men, and as black men in plantations, we hit our chest and say we're real men. We don't go to doctors. But the issue of breast cancer is something, I think, in terms of the research that's here now or that can be done, we've gotten the agreement from many of the providers. If we can cut the data, and I know we can cut the data, what are the kind of things that impede or have our community come into the healthcare system late? Is it because they had no insurance, which can be addressed? Is it because they have poor insurance, which can be addressed? Is it that they went to the wrong provider, which can be addressed? Is it that they live in environments? I'm sure that if we were to look at individual communities that didn't have toxic waste dumps in them, as opposed to those who do have toxic waste dumps, we can see a correlation. If we look at an urban area and the amount of sulfur dioxide that comes out of spews out of buses, and we don't have those kinds of things because we don't have the density in suburban areas, what's that correlation? We have so many things that are within our control if we think about them, but the idea and the fact that, and we still are suffering from Tuskegee, and we still don't trust the system, and we're fearful of the system, and we're fearful of saying breast cancer in our community. That's stigma with a small s. It's not a bigger stigma as is a sickle cell. It's a small s stigma. But those are the kind of things that we can overcome. There should not be an excessive morbidity and mortality in Connecticut relative to breast cancer. And I say that when I look at national data, and I've been spending a lot of time on national data to try to figure this out. The American Cancer Society actually produces a report that tells us that we can do better. There was something called the death rate ratio. And the death rate ratio is the rate of death between African Americans and non-African Americans in every state. So it's a rate, so it adjusts for itself because it's a rate based on population, it's a rate. And they have that for all the states and DC. So we're at what I call 0.107. That's our rate, which means we're 7% higher than the national average as a state. Massachusetts, which is contiguous to us, has relatively the same demographic with African Americans, is 0.87. What does that tell you? That's a 20% higher excessive morbidity and mortality in Connecticut than a contiguous state with the same demographics, which means it's not an issue of the disease. It's an issue of access and getting in a timely fashion. And what is the difference when you drill down and look at these two states, the big differences? The big difference is, by and large, most people in Mass have universal health care, a level playing field. No one talks about the fact that we don't have a level playing field in Connecticut or other parts of the country. So when I think about these variables within our control, there's no question that the cost to the African American community and the Black and Brown in community is the number, hundreds of millions of dollars and beyond that in terms of the excessive costs on the one hand for the system. But it really makes, we have never made the argument that we will not continue to lose our mothers and sisters and brothers, et cetera, and children because they have poor insurance. No one talks about that in Connecticut, the difference between what Romney did in Massachusetts and what's going on in Connecticut or any other state where they have different health insurances based on one's ability to afford it. The wealthy have uniform health insurance access. Those who are not wealthy, have a different tier of health care, therefore they have different access. And so I'm like to think that, and I think America is starting to understand the inequities on the Black Lives Matter that pervade everything. But as Martin Luther King said, there's no greater inequity in America than health disparities. And we're still working on that. But I think in Connecticut, I'm hoping that those partners that I spoke about earlier on will have whoever already agreed that we'll sit down and look at the data and look at how much of a role is poor insurance, how much of a role is no insurance relative to accessing healthcare. What may be the environmental issues when they look at, and I'm hoping in the database it may or may not be there, how many individuals are coming out of homes where there's smokers. The larger issue of the toxic waste dumps is relatively easy. Figure out a good epidemiologist can do that. Say this is a relatively, if they can adjust for economics, et cetera, et cetera. We have this dump on the boulevard, and we have this dump up over near Southern Connecticut State University. I'm not sure how many other toxic waste dumps we have in Connecticut, but mostly in urban areas. Those are all things that if we come together and love ourselves, and more importantly, love the most important part of our family, why are we allowing this to go on? And if we know that some of our members of our community are fearful of going in, they may have insurance, they're fearful. What are we doing around the table? We're looking around the table and we're smiling and talking about the NBA. But are we making sure all of us, based on what we're at risk for, but based on age, is in the system, taking care of them? We're taking care of them. And I do think, and I look at these, what I call social determinants, and the system has all this data that we're referring to: bad insurance, lack of insurance, wrong provider, the wrong healthcare system, who's smoking in the home. If we don't pay attention to them, those who come into the system late, come out of a household smoking, may have poor insurance, therefore they can't get timely access to getting into the system or timely access to an appointment. The young lady spoke a minute ago about Miss Brooks, about the fact that she could afford the $50. There should not be an issue around something so important as being diagnosed in a timely fashion around the disease that can take your life. And so that's what I wanted to say. And I just think that the more we can have discussions with those who have our best interest at hand, the more we're informed. One thing that we've always lost coming out of slavery is we were never taught to read for a reason. If we couldn't read, we couldn't control our own fate. We didn't have the data. We've never had the data. They've always kept that away from us. But now the data is available for us. And I do think, and I pray, but I have a good sense that every man and woman in Connecticut, regardless of genetics and race and ethnicity, wants the same thing. We want to have healthy communities. We don't want mothers and daughters to die without reason because of a false system. There is no system. If there was a system, these things would not occur. And so that's the thing I want to talk about, and I present it at a 40,000 foot perspective. But hopefully everyone understands that if we can deal with those 4 or 5, there may be more social, what we call determinants, things that we deal with that are within our hands, our control. We can actually, and the goal should be equity. The rate of death should be dependent upon the disease, not dependent upon when you get into the system. Not dependent upon when you get into the system, because the mass system has told us, all things being equal, the healthcare inequity divide narrows dramatically. In Connecticut, it's still 0.07. Another contiguous state is 0.87. And the difference there, on the one hand, from a larger perspective, is the fact that they have universal health care to a large degree. But, even though you may have universal health care, are we fearful, are our young ladies and others fearful of getting into the healthcare system because of the racism that exists there, from the community, the stigma around breast cancer in our community, and it may or may not. I use a small s I talk about breast cancer within our community, because I deal with the biggest S right now is with sickle cell. No one helps them at all. But with the small S, there's a stigma there also. Around, I don't want to go into, it was the young lady who was on earlier, Miss Brooks talked about, she was quiet because she was fearful of the results of the 3D mammogram. And we have to get this fear away, because that small fear, a small point in time, has such a dramatic impact on the rest of our quality of lives of the entire families. Okay. And with that, I'll end if there's questions, and I really want to get everyone involved. I've already spoken to the leadership of Sisters Journey early on, and I told, I forgot the young lady's name. We talked, it'll come to me. She'll beat me up because of that, that they want to back up to us and work with us. And we want everyone to come together, but we can minimize and actually dissipate the amount of inequities in the state of Connecticut. And with that, I'll close to some extent.
Thank you so very, very much, Mr. Robbins. I thank you for the information. One thing that really stood out to me, what you were saying, is that we can overcome the numerous variables, that they are within our control. Like you said, over the breast cancer, certain things is poor insurance and no insurance, and our environment and the wrong providers sometimes that we pick, and the timely access to it. So thank you so very much for all this critical information that you have given us. I just want to take this opportunity just to say a few things. I had a sister a couple of years ago that also passed with breast cancer. So I know that, like the speakers that I've had on the platform, they're survivors, but my sister didn't. And I know the importance of early detection. And see, it wasn't early detection for her. By the time she found out, she was already stage 4.
Yep.
So that early detection is essential, So we're gonna have to get past the fear of not going to see about ourselves. I think early on in the month when we first started out with this broadcast, I made the statement that, especially as women, we are naturally caretakers, and we're so used to taking care of everybody else.
That's right.
fail to take care of ourselves.
That's right.
In order for us to adequately take care of our loved ones, we have to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
We will put off our mammograms, we'll put off our exams for whatever reason. We're busy, we're doing something for somebody else, but we're going to have to take care of us. All right. So again, I would like to thank, not only you two, but I would like to thank all of our honored guests that came on our broadcast for the whole month of October to help us to acknowledge cancer awareness. We've had speakers from the Sisters Journey, of course, Ms. Brooks.
Yeah.
We've had Evangelist Adela Bell. We've had Shania Armstrong. We've had another group, Nubian Sisters Cancer Support Group. That was also the founder, Reverend Jacqueline Roberts, and she was on. And we had Miss Janet Brown. She's the health navigator for Yale New Haven Hospital, and of course, none other than Mr. James Rollins, Connecticut State Health Care of the NAACP.
They call me John Lewis.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Good trouble. Good trouble.
All right, we thank Bishop, my
Thank you.
surprise guest.
Right.
And he came just for Mr. Lewis. I mean, for Mr. Rollins. I'm sorry. But we thank the Lord for everybody.
Yes. Yes.
But you know what, really, for taking you all the time. I think I told you all earlier. We do not take this lightly. And we thank you all, and we know you're busy. And for taking your time out, and sharing your stories and sharing your information. Because it's very important. It's critical information that needs to get out there. Because just like Mr. Rollins said, we can control this.
Yes.
We can control this. This is within our grasp as we get the information and do something with it.
Yes.
You know, do something with it. So again, I thank you all for coming in. And don't forget, next Tuesday, exercise your right. Take advantage of your right. Vote.
Especially those in Virginia.
You know what? We actually did the early voting. We drove up and they brought the ballots to us. So we're done.
All right.
That's right. Like Bishop says all the time, I can't tell you who to vote for, but whatever you do, vote.
You're
Yes.
right.
Vote.
I just want to thank you. Evangelist, I just want to thank you.
You will.
These are the opportunities we need to work in our community. This is nothing extra. This data is of no value if we don't have individuals like yourself providing leadership so we can inform and help and protect our community. So it's not, this is a blessing to me.
Yes.
As we start to work with these big systems, because I want us to come back in a year from now, look at the data and see a different outcome. I don't work just to share data. I want to be able to look at and see the decreases in the lives we've saved. And that's where we're going from the NAACP. That's where we're going in partnership.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I call it good trouble. That's where we are. Good trouble.
Absolutely. And if I can say something, there's nothing better than early detection. And I'm here to tell you, you know, we caught it early. I was able to take care of it early. And if I do nothing else other than to inspire someone to be vigilant, please go get checked. Be vigilant about your body. Be vigilant about your mammograms. Be vigilant. Because something so small, the size of my fingernail, you know, took 3 years of my life to fight. But you know what? I dug deep and I had my support circle. And 3 years later, I'm stronger than I ever was before. And if I can inspire anyone, I hope I inspire someone, because go early, get it done.
Yes.
It's something that has to be done, because I was not ready to leave here. My work is not finished. My work is not finished. So please.
There was a fella from New York that I always remember what he said. Congressman Adam Clayton Powell.
Okay.
Many of you folks are too young for that, but Adam Clayton Powell always said to everyone of color, "What's in your hand?
Mm-hmm.
What's in your hand is your destiny to control yourself and your community. And these variables are within our hand."
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. I guess I can say no more. I am going to end this broadcast tonight with the way I always end it. God loves you.
Yes.
Stay safe and be blessed. And I love you too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.